welcome to the latest edition of Call the Doctor, the weekly Workers' Party programme talking about all things NHS with the great Dr. Bob Gill, who produced the film, the seminal film, The Great NHS Heist. And if anybody listening has got any questions or comments they want to make during the course of the programme, please feel free to raise your hand or put a comment in the comment section, and we'll put those queries or questions or comments that you might have to Bob. But there's a few things I think we should perhaps discuss this evening, Bob. And I don't know if you saw that interview on BBC Newsnight last week with a doctor who was still completing his training. But he was quite a senior practitioner. We've got a few more years to go, I believe. But he was just talking about how the student loan that he took out has just ballooned, and I think he said he owed something like £70,000, and he was likely to owe by the end of it over £100,000. But I think maybe just before we get your thoughts, Bob, it might be just worth just showing a clip of that video with the salient points so that you can see that, and obviously viewers and listeners can hear it as well.
Okay, let's talk to Dr. Arthur Giustra, trainee paediatrician, graduated in
2022 from Nottingham.
2022 from Nottingham. And how much did you borrow?
So I borrowed in total £55,000.
How much have you paid back?
I've paid back around about £10,000.
How much do you owe now?
£72,000.
Oh God.
Yeah, so it's creeping up slowly but surely. It's quite a significant amount coming out each month, around about £250, give or take.
So you're paying 250 quid back each month?
Yep, so since graduating, I've been full-time as a doctor, so I'm now in my 4th year. Every month it comes out of my paycheck, about £250, roughly about £3,000 a year. And despite that, it's still going up. And that 55,000 figure was 60-something after university. It's creeping up, and now it's sitting at about 72.
How does that make you feel?
There's a bit of anxiety about it, and I think it's very much shared between not just other doctors, but anybody who's a graduate who's been to university. This thought that despite being in full-time education, despite pushing yourself, training, upskilling in your career, it's still just creeping up in the background, and there's not really an awful lot you can do about it.
Did you realise it was going to be like this? I mean,
I think the honest answer is no.
How come then?
How come I was 17, 18 when you take out a loan. Listening to Martin speak a minute ago, there's not that education, there's not that financial or economic education at that age. It's just the done thing to go to university, take out a loan. You did hear phrases going back way back when, it'll be a phone contract a month, you won't see it, but actually £250 a month is a significant amount. That's only going to increase. And I think people are starting to come around to the fact that actually it's not a loan, it's actually a 9% graduation tax, with the threshold staying where they are at £28,000. The median graduate is on about £30,000. You're immediately into it, you're immediately paying somewhat towards that interest, but you're not even coming close to paying that loan.
I mean, I used to say to
interesting, Bob. I mean, is it deterring people, do you think, from going into the profession? I know Martin Lewis said that there was a moral imperative here, that was effectively a contract made with young people who took out these loans, and it seems the government is now breaking that trust that they put in. I mean, there's obviously a question about whether people should be paying for their tuition in the first instance, which clearly I don't think they should be. It should be free. But I mean, even under the terms of the system that we have, it seems the government are reneging on a deal, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, people, when they're in their late teenage years thinking about whether to go into higher education or not, most of them aren't really very financially literate. They think it's the done thing, and they maybe quite naively enter into it. But what we're realizing is actually the terms and conditions of the student loan have changed over the years. So an interest rate of 9% is more than we would pay for a mortgage, for example. So they're actually being actively exploited. And we've seen how initially the charge was, I believe, £1,000 or £2,000 annually, but that increased to £10,000 a year for whatever degree you're studying. So it just shows that, the slippery slope of introducing policy, knowing full well that you're going to extend the scope and the impact of that policy, is what the Blair government did. And this was, compounded by the coalition government in 2010. Nick Clegg famously promised to get rid of student loans, did exactly the opposite. So we now have, in fact, not a higher education system. We have a higher education industrial complex, whereby the main purpose of the university life is to serve as a financial instrument for others. So you're having students entering into higher education, ending up servicing a debt, which, as we heard with that recording there, an initial debt of 55, paying £10,000 to what he thought was to reduce the loan, but he's still got a loan of 72,000. And I think it's the principle of compounding, because what people don't understand is they're going to be owing 9% more on their original loan every year. So that loan is growing every year, and then it's 9% of a greater sum. And you end up, unless you're paying off a big chunk of debt, you're ending off with a growing debt. And this is a form of sort of debt slavery, really, debt bondage. And if you add on top of that, we now know that there's a growing problem of doctor or graduate unemployment. So they are saddled with debt when they should be starting on life's journey, getting into employment, maybe thinking of starting a family, maybe buying a house. All of those things are now out of reach for most graduates.
The loan book for the student loans, Bob. I mean, who controls that? Who's running that? Do we know?
I understand that was the loan book was privatized, or at least it's being prepared to be privatized. So very often we see ahead of privatization, the government doing the dirty work on behalf of future investors. It came out again. We were reminded of the post office scandal earlier this last week, whereby the senior executives were burying the bad news regarding the Toshiba, I believe the IT system. They were deliberately burying it so it would not show up on the prospectus for the privatization. So what the government did was bring in the Trojan horse of student loans, knowing full well this would expand, and later on, when it was ripe, it would be handed over to the private financial sector.
Yeah, terrible. I mean, what do you think Nye Bevan would make of it all? The founding father of the National Health Service.
Yeah, well, what he had in mind for the NHS was, we would train people to a high quality. The public would invest in the training and supervision of doctors and nurses, who would then serve in a well-funded public service and be able to give back and be appreciated for the dedication they have shown. And it was about raising standards. It was about the government having control of quality, having control of staff, planning staff. But now everything is left to the market. So you have naive people coming in thinking that there might be a guaranteed job at the end of the day, and getting into debt might be worthwhile. But actually, all those guarantees and protections have been removed. So you're now at the will and the whim of the market, a market in healthcare where the chief executives go on record saying we don't need doctors in healthcare anymore. This is the insanity that is at play. So, that was reported in something called the Health Service Journal, although it's not a journal really, it's a trade magazine for private providers and all the senior executives. And they were quoting a chief executive of an NHS trust saying there are too many doctors within the NHS.
Yes, indeed. Well, I just want to come on to that then, Bob. But before I do that, just a quick reminder, if anybody's got any questions or comments they want to put to Bob, just let us know. Put your hand up or put a comment in the comment section, and we'll put that to Bob. But just this point then, Bob, that you made there about this sense that or this viewpoint that seems to be held in government that we've got too many doctors. I mean, this notion of these advanced critical care practitioners, which they are apparently going to be running intensive care units now, with no ICU consultants on the site. So we're going to have a situation where intensive care units are going to be run by physios and nurses. I mean, that really is a case in point, isn't it, in terms of the point that you're making there about reducing all this perception that is being promulgated that we don't need the sort of highly skilled doctors necessarily for much of the healthcare that we are providing. I mean, what's your thoughts on these advanced critical care practitioner idea?
Well, it doesn't take a genius to work out that the less qualified the person looking after you, the more likely you're going to run into mistakes. And then if it's an institutional policy to be doing this, there becomes an incentive when things go wrong to cover up. And now I was quite closely involved in supporting a whistleblower trainee, Dr. Chris Day, over a decade ago, who found himself in a situation in an ITU setting where he was a junior doctor. He'd just started specialist training, and he was left unsupervised overnight. And in that situation with a colleague similarly junior in qualification, they were being forced to undertake procedures that they had never done because they expected some on-the-job training. And one of the events that took place was a junior doctor colleague of his in an emergency was asked to put a chest drain in to release air that had escaped out of a deflated lung or a punctured lung. And instead of going into the space outside of the lung, he ended up going through the liver. Right. And that patient bled to death. Now, as a consequence of that unfortunate event, rather than saying, hang on a minute, we need to support junior doctors, this is an unsafe practice, the trust then proceeded to destroy the career of Dr. Chris Day, who was in effect a whistleblower, because the consultants wouldn't support him and the management needed to shut him up. And the only way they could shut him up was to, in the end, push him out of his career, and then ensued a prolonged employment tribunal, which didn't reach a fair and just conclusion, because the establishment's interest is to protect the institution and not the patient. So if you're expanding the notion of getting less qualified people doing more and more safety critical procedures, you're going to have more and more dead people, preventably dead people. And we're seeing this happen. And the fact that they're rolling it out to an ITU is beyond belief.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's sort of a accident waiting to happen. And you've already highlighted one of those cases. And I mean, you're saying he didn't, the doctor that you were assisting, he didn't get the outcome that he was hoping for? I mean, did he not get reinstated then or anything? I mean, what was the outcome of that particular instance?
Well, there's an inbuilt bias within the judicial system and the employment tribunal system. The chances of success, even if you've got a very strong case, are very low. I think it's in single figures winning an employment tribunal. But there were so many irregularities within the case, which have been well documented and featured in articles in the Telegraph and various other places, whereby, for example, the trust that was involved destroyed a whole email account, deleted 90,000 emails, and the judge just accepted that this was human error. So active destruction of evidence was overlooked by the judge. And ultimately they come to a perverse conclusion. So things are stacked up against the whistleblower. And that's why these scandals do not get nipped in the bud. They become bigger and bigger and bigger. And we saw this in the post office scandal cover-up, whereby they would rather send innocent people to prison or put them under so much stress that they commit suicide than admit that they're operating a cover-up and the decisions the executives took were deeply flawed and indeed very costly. And again, to cover up ahead of a privatization, to keep it as clean as possible.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, what is at root of all of these reforms is the project of privatization. So you mustn't shed any light on the consequences of political policy.
Yeah, no, indeed. It's a viewpoint which is reflected in one of the comments in the comments section. Bob, somebody's saying there aren't too many doctors in the NHS. There are too many ACPs and PAs without even the right base qualifications to perform medical tasks. These are all healthcare demolition policies, which I think you would probably agree with, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's move on then, Bob, if I can. There was something else which was I saw again on social media this week. Admittedly, it was over in the United States, and it was really talking about the conflict of interest between the private health insurance, which is obviously the big thing in the United States. They don't have a kind of publicly funded system like ours. But I think it was a Senate hearing.
Which of your companies own or control a health insurance division? Raise your hand. Please keep your hand up if you also employ healthcare providers or own clinics, specialty pharmacies, or any other kind of medical practice or pharmacy. Please keep your hand up if you also own or control a pharmacy benefit manager. And please keep your hand up if you lead a publicly traded company at which you have a legal responsibility to maximize shareholder value. So we've established on the record that the largest health insurance companies are not just insurers. They are also medical providers and pharmacies, diagnosing and deciding treatment for patients. They are also PBMs, another form of middlemen managing drug benefits. They are increasingly controlling every aspect of our healthcare system.
And they've got all these characters there, and the senator was asking these representatives from these companies to put their hands up if they also had an interest in actually providing medical care, in actually supplying and providing, pharmaceuticals and so on. I mean, it's a real conflict of interest, it seems to me. I mean, and that seems to be the direction that we are travelling in, isn't it? I know we've touched on this before, but I don't think we've actually explicitly talked in this show about those very clear conflicts. Just say a word or two, will you, about that? Because I know you in the Great NHS Heist, you obviously looked at the American experience, and I just wonder what your thoughts are about that conflict and how far we are away from that in this country.
Yeah, I think the clip you're referring to was quite shocking, really, although I knew much of what was going on. And you had these chief executives of insurance companies, I believe all 5 that were represented there, put their hands up when he said, are you're clearly involved in private insurance. Are you involved in pharmacy benefit agencies? Yes, they were. And are they also involved in the providing of healthcare? So in effect, that was a demonstration of how the American system is now really a cartel to maximize profit. You've got a few big players who dominate healthcare provision, the healthcare market in America, and they also they profit from the drugs that are being prescribed. They profit from the services that are being produced, and they are perpetuating a charade that somehow these are competing interests. They're not competing interests. It's the same people. So, it makes a mockery of the idea that a competing market drives up quality and drives down price. It's exactly the opposite in the American system. And it's the American players that have now infiltrated the NHS, in particular the insurance company United Health and its subsidiary in the UK, Optum. And we have, for example, the patient electronic data company, which is now, found throughout the NHS. You have companies like Palantir who are providing data support platforms for the NHS and other public services. So wherever you look, it's these players that are operating a cartel in America who are coming into the NHS. And this does not bode well. The reason they're coming in is because the healthcare in the US is saturated now, and they're looking for new profit streams. And the UK has an open door policy to these large multinational corporations to raid and extract as much profit as they can possibly achieve.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, and there's a rather pessimistic comment from one of our listeners saying that the NHS and actually all infrastructural services such as water, national grid, telecom should remain public, or should have remained public assets. I mean, it says should remain, but they are obviously in the private sector now, but should remain public assets. So there's no profiteering. It looks like we're heading towards the USA model. I mean, the chickens are coming home to roost, aren't they? I mean, right across the piece in every area, and it seems the government is ploughing on regardless, even though we're seeing that this privatization model, this obsession with neoliberalism, simply isn't working. Not for the vast majority of people, anyway. It's working clearly for the the richest in society, the corporate class. But what do you make of that, Bob? I mean, what government's supposed to be elected to represent the best interests of the people, but it seems the government's only representing the best interests of a very small sliver of the people.
Yeah, I think it says something about the caliber of politicians we're producing. You have to be of a certain ideological bent to get anywhere near power, it seems. So, they seem totally resistant to any new idea penetrating their skulls. They're pro-war, they're pro-privatization, they're pro-corporate, they're pro the billionaire class, they're the sort of Davos worshipping, brainless political class we seem to be ruled by across the Western or the sort of Anglo-Saxon democracies. This seems to be the only game in town, and whether it's wishful thinking and short-termism that these politicians are just going to cash up while the going is good until the music stops, and then who will be left to pick up the pieces?
That's a very good point. Let's anybody else as well, of course, who wants to make a point, then please feel free to do so. There was something else which was again on social media this week, and it was just a regular member of the public just kind of commenting on the situation as he saw it, and the best way I could describe it really, he was sort of describing and giving some evidence to back up his assumptions, a sort of a slow motion euthanasia. I think it might be just worth it's a couple of minutes. It took about 2.5 minutes. This guy just setting out his kind of thesis about what he thinks is happening. I'd just like you to hear that, Bob, and obviously our listeners as well, and just get your thoughts and anybody else who's listening in. If you've got any comments on this, please let us know, and we'll bring you into the show. But Chris, if you could just play that video first.
Everyone thinks the future is about innovation, AI, smart cities, green energy, but that's the cover story. The real future is about reducing the human surplus without a single bullet fired. And the system that is being built makes it look like progress. In the old world, humans were assets. More people meant more labor, more soldiers, more taxpayers. But technology flipped the equation. When automation does the work, people become liabilities. They consume resources and they produce nothing. From a corporate state perspective, they are dead weight on the balance sheet. Now, what happens to liabilities in any system? They are minimized, quietly, efficiently. You don't announce population reduction. You don't draft policies that say, time to eliminate 800 million people. You design the environment so people self-select out of life. First, you control food economics. Make real nutrition a luxury. Flood markets with synthetic hyper-processed calories. Why? Cheap to make, addictive to consume, and lethal over time. Obesity, diabetes, cancers. It's slow-motion euthanasia disguised as personal choice. And then you privatize survival systems. Hospitals, medicine, insurance. Turn health into a product, and when the bill comes and you can't pay, nature takes its course. No violence, no fingerprints. Meanwhile, you flood culture with distractions. War headlines, influencer drama, ideological cage matches, so no one notices the algorithm that decides who thrives and who quietly disappears. People think they are arguing politics, but in reality they are debating inside the zoo enclosure, while the zookeeper holds the keys to their lifespan. This isn't genocide. It is market-driven selection, a corporate Darwinism where the unprofitable simply phase out. And the punchline? They don't kill you. They invoice you until you die. This is the most profitable extinction in human history. And it's happening in slow motion while everyone thinks they are free.
Interesting, Bob. I mean, some people would no doubt dismiss that as just sort of conspiracy theory. Some guy who really, doesn't know what he's talking about. It's just a lot of nonsense. But there seems to be some truth in what he's saying. I mean, some of the themes that he's talking about in his piece there are things that we've touched on. Some things you've talked about in terms of the food industry and how they make processed food addictive, etc., which is unhealthy for people and so on and so forth. I mean, what's your reaction to what he's saying, Bob? And what would be your reaction to people who would dismiss him as a conspiracy theorist?
Yeah, so I think he pulls together a lot of what most of us couldn't disagree with in terms of how big pharma makes money through it's not very profitable if everybody's healthy, right? So you're not going to get a profit-driven model which will promote prevention. So that doesn't really exist. The food companies profit from making food very hyper palatable and addictive if they can, because we know the tobacco industry moved into the food industry. So, we do have experience and evidence that these huge profit concerns have repeatedly acted against the public interest, be it a drug company refusing to pull off a drug off the market that they know is dangerous, doing more harm than good, be it the producers like the tobacco industry hiding evidence that tobacco was harmful to health for as long as they could. So they put profit above human survival. And then we've seen government policy. We've had the policy of austerity following on from the financial crash in 2008, which predictably led to the premature deaths of millions of people through them not having enough to pay for survival in terms of food or access to heat or basics of survival, really. They couldn't afford it anymore. So we had government policy driving people into premature death. And we also know that, people such as Henry Kissinger, the Club of Rome, have published details on why they think in order to be sustainable, the world is overpopulated. We've had various commentators, even I believe Boris Johnson's father gave an interview on British television saying, the UK is overpopulated, we could survive with 20 million people or something along those lines. So we have an elite class who believe that if you're not in the elite, you're surplus to requirement. And now that there's greater reliance on mechanization and AI, you could make the logical conclusion that there is a growing surplus of humanity which isn't generating a profit. And then where does that naturally take you? It takes you to pulling away the support structures for maintaining that population. And as it happens, we're seeing our own public services being slowly crushed. Well, if this is part of a master plan that person outlined, well, it would fit in. Or is it an unfortunate series of coincidences? You know, people have to make up their own minds, but certainly a lot of what he draws out is based in fact.
Let me just read a comment as well, another comment from somebody who's saying she actually shudders to think I've gotten well anywhere outside London, as I've assisted others to emergency services in places like Oldham and Manchester, and it's diabolical. I mean, is that a fair reflection, you think, that the healthcare provision is somewhat better? I know there is a lot more investment, for example, in infrastructure in London compared to outside of the capital in the north of the country and so on. But does that also apply to the health service as well? I mean, what's your thoughts in relation to that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an oversimplification. So, you know, I have the misfortune of most of my patients having to access a hospital called Queen Elizabeth's in Woolwich, where, you know, as I said, you know, the whistleblower I supported, he worked there. My patients routinely describe how they're waiting for hours, you know, 5-10 hours to access an assessment. We know across the country there is corridor care has now been normalized. You might be better accessing some of the central teaching hospitals where staffing levels tend to be a bit higher, but you know, it is luck of the draw. And where you're in one of the smaller towns and cities where there might have been 2 major hospitals serving the population, now they only have 1 hospital serving the population, and it may take you an hour or 2 to get to the nearest city that has hospital provision. Well, your chances are going to be even worse because you have to factor in travel time. But when you get to any hospital across the country, there is a risk of you waiting to be seen, and then even if you are seen, languishing in a corridor before you get proper supervision. So, you know, that is across the country. But yes, admittedly, some of those central London teaching hospitals may be better staffed and you may have better luck, but the risk is across the board.
The more general point you made, Bob, about the closure of hospitals in smaller towns and cities. I remember, you know, in the sort of early noughties and so on, that this was being badged as being a positive thing because we were going to create these centres of excellence where, you know, there'd be a critical mass of specialists, and so there would be an overall uplift in the level of care across the piece. I mean, was that for the birds, or was there any validity to that argument?
Yeah, that's what you call a plausible cover story. The vast majority of what the district general hospitals receive in an acute setting can be handled by the district general hospital. So you don't close these district general hospitals. So you might have a better level of service for 5-10% of the more complicated cases. What you end up doing is making the 100% having to travel further and compete for access to services. So it is a plausible excuse to actually contract overall provision, to reduce the number of beds overall, to reduce the size of intensive care units overall. So in my local vicinity, we had 2 district general hospitals, both with their own intensive care units. And what happened when one intensive care unit closed was the burden fell on the remaining intensive care unit, which did not expand to cover the loss of beds that we had already suffered. So it covers a shrinkage in provision and a shrinkage in capacity. But it provides, you know, a distraction and a cover to pacify the masses, because unfortunately most of us still believe authority. We still believe that what we're being told is the truth, And why would somebody lie over such a critical thing? Well, they select the sociopaths and the psychopaths to tell us the lies.
Yes, well, that certainly seems to be the case, Bob, for sure. Let me bring in Irene now, as asked if she could speak. The floor is yours, Irene.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. There's so many threads that could be followed from the discussion. What I was thinking of is the establishment or the creation globally. It's always been there, but now it's spreading to the Western nations, which haven't experienced it so critically before, of the precariat, who live lives that are totally insecure in every single economic and perhaps social way. And that, amongst other things, we can discuss that guy standing, Hudson, there are lots of excellent work on that, but it's the aspects on health. To live under such stress, endless stress, is a death sentence. So you don't need euthanasia. People will go to early graves through worry, stress, turning to drugs, to null the pain, lack of a voice, disempowerment. All of those things have an adverse effect on the well-being of the individual and the community, and we can see it. People are aggressive, tense, can't listen, can't discuss, have limited playtime, no good social spaces. I mean, all of those issues. And then we have the hospitalized aspect of care, the medical model of care as well, which is being cut to the bone. So, just lots and lots of aspects to explore.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. And indeed, I think, what you are saying there, Irene, it was, I don't know if you heard the video that we played a little earlier in the show, and that was a kind of theme, or amongst the themes that the guy was pointing out when he was talking about a sort of a slow motion euthanasia in that sense. So it's kind of, it's not an explicit and overt euthanasia policy, but it's happening almost not by default, but it's sort of happening, incidentally to the sort of policies which are being, pursued by government and the big corporations, as it were. Let me just get Bob's reaction to your comment, and then we'll bring in. I think we've got Aya now on the line, so I'll bring Aya in there, because I've been trying to get Aya for about three times now, so hopefully third time lucky. But Bob, just respond to Aya, and then we'll bring Aya in for her comment.
Yeah, I think that Irene's hit the nail on the head. The withdrawal of support, the sort of minimum wage gig economy culture is taking away people's means of survival, and what you end up creating is the diseases of despair: alcoholism, gambling, which we'll talk about later on, poor nutrition, and stress is massive. So when you have no security, stress is a driver of disease. And we know even within London, if you travel 5-10 miles, you have a different in life expectancy of about 10 years. And this is because you're going from a very poor borough where there's minimal provision and low wages or benefits, barely survival benefits. And then you go across the border into Westminster, for example, where people are much better off and their survival is vastly better. So that's Irene's point down to a T, and we saw the evidence play out with various reports following the austerity program. No,
you're right, Bob, and and that picture that you just painted there is true right across the country, in every town and city, every borough. I know that when I was a leader of the council in Derby, we commissioned a poverty profile on an annual basis, and that illustrated just here in my city, where people living in one end of the city, a place called Alice Street, their life expectancy at that point, and this is going back about 20 odd years or so, but I think if anything, things have kind of got worse, was I think I think it was 13 or 15 years longer, their life expectancy, than people born at the other end of the city in a suburb called Allenton. So that story, Bobby, yeah, it's something which is, you know, right across the country. But let's bring in Aya now, if we can sort it now, sort the technical difficulties. Aya, you have the floor if your microphone is working.
Yeah, hi. The mic is work now.
Ah, great. Nice to hear from you, Aya. What was your point that you wanted to put to Bob?
What?
What point did you want to put to Bob? Did you have a question or a comment that you wanted to make to Dr. Bob?
No, but Dr. Bob said something very important.
Okay.
Is it about medicine and hospital and waiting? I heard that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add something. There is also lack of medicine supplies. Everything is going better now, right? But there's lack actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Bob, sorry, did you want to say something else, though?
No, thanks.
No, okay, Bob. I mean, what about that? The medical supplies, and what's the issue there?
Yeah, there seems to be an increasing frequency of drug supply issues, whether that's because of the sort of increased friction following the Brexit, the sort of bureaucratic gumming up of the system, but there's also an element of profiteering, no surprise, whereby you're getting consolidation amongst drug producers, so they end up creating a monopoly. And a recent example has been the skyrocketing of the price of aspirin, believe it or not. I believe the figure I remember was the cost of aspirin's gone up 1,000%. Now that it's not because it's a complicated pharmaceutical to produce, it's because the companies producing it consolidate, they take out the competition, and then they say, right, let's fleece the public purse. So this is something that could be easily outlawed, but the government wants to allow the market a free hand, and we pay the price.
Yeah, no, indeed. And I think we've also got somebody on from Families Against Involuntary Medical Euthanasia. Could we bring them in, Chris?
Yes,
Hi.
that's me.
Hi there.
Hi.
What would you like to say?
Hello.
Hi.
Bob knows me. We've hosted him at the Together Declaration.
Okay.
Right. But I want to talk about and ask Bob how we can really organise to take on the protocolization of medicine. So what we are seeing, and we have a dossier of cases, is that more and more people who are deemed to be end of life, who may not be at end of life, who may be at end of life, are having their lives hastened by hospital protocol. And I've been campaigning against this for the last 4 years. And on Monday, my own brother's life was taken at the Countess of Chester. Now, my brother had stage 4 lung cancer. It had spread to other areas of the body, but he was sitting up watching TV on the Saturday. By Monday, he was dead. Right. He needed the morphine, but not the midazolam. Now, the combination of those two drugs, and I'd like to Bob to talk about that if he might, because I am extremely concerned by the protocolization of medicine. When I asked the doctors, I asked 3 doctors to reverse what they were doing. The second one agreed with me. The third one overruled it. But these drugs are being used to, and there's it's a terrible fudge. So what they will say is, we are following protocol. We are giving these people these drugs to ease their symptoms. The very symptoms they are saying they are easing, they are creating. So the person cannot breathe and drowns basically in their own fluids. Now, the very similar thing happens, of course, on death row, the drugs that they use on death row, and the drugs that they will probably be, similar drugs. I know that they use barbiturates in assisted suicide. But I'm very concerned because I campaign also against the assisted suicide bill for the very reason that I think that if that comes in, it will become normalised.
Right.
And it will be, because we are seeing and I'm sure Bob will agree here, we're seeing the winding down of palliative care. And so what happens is people, they're put on treatment ceilings. Treatment ceilings are imposed as saying, well, you've had enough treatment now. Any more treatment is going to be not in your best interests. And therefore, we're going to hasten you to the end. And I think we need to change these protocols. And I think we need to campaign against them because they are killing people.
Right, Bob, what's your thoughts on that then, Bob?
Yeah, so I agree with the sentiment of every word we've just heard there. Unfortunately, the way the NHS has been forced to become, medicine has become very top down. Doctors have lost autonomy. They're very fearful that if they don't follow the protocol, they may succumb to some sort of professional sanction. If not a professional sanction, their employer might take some act against them. So they feel quite vulnerable. There's also a misplaced trust in these top-down organizations and regulators. You've got organizations like NICE, you've got the medicines regulator. There's an assumption that these people are acting on best evidence. So there's a naivety within the medical community that they very often have conflicts of interest. So, most medics don't realize that the medical regulator regulating drugs is 80+% funded by the pharmaceutical industry.
Right. Yeah.
Now, how are we supposed to think that they are independent if they're receiving money from the people producing the drugs? So that is something that can be quite easily fixed. And then you have the hospital trusts who have a capacity problem. And, increasingly, in order to free up beds, well, would it be attractive to speed up people's demise? So, that becomes an issue. And then when it becomes culturally acceptable that people under these circumstances have to be, eased through their suffering prematurely through the pearly gates, you can see how this becomes absorbed by others, right?
Yeah.
However, if you are the sort of doctor or nurse who has organizational memory and experience and can remember, hang on, this is not how we used to treat people when we had enough staff and enough beds. And then you see this happening around you, what do? Either you become hardened, you become blind to what's going on, or you decide, I'm going to take the exit. I'm going to go for early retirement. I can no longer live and witness what's going on. And then you have a further concentration of the people who will just follow orders. Effectively, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
They're blindly following orders. They're too busy perhaps to look into the detail. And we've collectively lived through the biggest health scandal ever to have taken place in my memory, which was how we managed the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
And
yes.
The speaker said about midazolam. Midazolam is in the benzodiazepine family, and it might relieve suffering and agitation, but it also stops you breathing.
Right.
And if you give morphine, another drug that slows down your breathing, to somebody who can't breathe,
yes,
guess what happens, Chris?
Yes.
They stop breathing.
Indeed.
And this was adopted by NICE. It became a NICE guideline to give people opiates, morphine, and midazolam while they were struggling to breathe with COVID. Right. And guess what happened? We had a lot of COVID deaths.
Indeed.
So they've quietly taken that guideline off their website, funnily enough. So we have lived through a catastrophic top-down medical exercise, which still most doctors seem unwilling to face up to. are just happy to turn a blind eye and carry on as if nothing happened. And it's not just doctors; it's human nature.
Yes.
When your employer and when your regulatory bodies are saying there's nothing to see here, carry on as normal, then the path of least resistance becomes the most attractive path.
Yeah, no, indeed. It's a really chilling tale, Bob, for sure. Let me just change gear one more time then, Bob, before we close this evening. And it's something else that's, again, covered in on social media. And it was in relation to the advertising of online gambling and the impact this has on society, and in particular in terms of mental health. Now, some countries are taking action, their governments are taking action to restrict, to limit, to ban advertising of online gambling because of the detrimental impact that it's having on individuals and indeed on society as a whole. And I just want to play, if I can get Chris could line this up, a quick video of somebody who was describing the situation. I think it was in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, but you'll hear it in a moment, Bob. It's only a minute or so. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that and where we're going in this country. If you could show that.
So in Ontario, Canada, which in 2022 made the decision to move from a state monopoly control over gambling to a system of privatized licensees, what we see is this expansion of gambling in the province led to a massive influx of advertisement, led to a 40% increase in helpline call volume compared to pre-pandemic levels, and has also seen a quadrupling in gambling-related bankruptcy declarations in the province. And all of this has led the federal government of Canada to introduce a bill to the House of Commons, which is under consideration right now, to ban sports gambling advertisement outright in the country. And this would be consistent with 8 or 9, I believe, European nations who over the last 5 years have done similar things. In Spain, where this has been done, we've seen a decrease in online gambling accounts created, the amount of money being spent on online gambling, and a weakening link between advertisement and gambling expenditure. So the online aspect of this gambling activity makes it very accessible, very convenient, and we believe increases the risks posed to consumers.
What's your thoughts on that, Bob? Because, I mean, I know from my own sort of anecdotal experience of speaking to people who've, been hooked on gambling and online gambling in particular, and it's had a profound effect on some friends of mine, actually, on their mental health. I mean, the government should be taking tougher action, shouldn't they? I mean, and I guess you probably have had patience with these sorts of difficulties associated with gambling, but just generally, what's your thoughts, Bob, on where we are in this country with that issue?
Yeah, so gambling is an example of a very predatory enterprise. It's been massively deregulated. It's become extremely accessible. There's no more sort of walking down the high street and queuing up outside the bookies. It's all on your phone. So within the comfort of your own home, you can download multiple apps. They lure you in by giving you £20 or £50 free bets. It's very attractive. The presentation on your mobile phone is very cleverly crafted with bells and whistles and rapid changes in terms of the animation that comes up. And this is very cleverly crafted. There's a whole science in how to keep you scrolling, or how to keep your eyes in contact with the screen. And then that addictive element of the programming is then weaponized to keep you hooked and then to lure you in. And unfortunately, gambling, if you've lost money, psychologically you think, well, if only I carry on placing bets, I'm bound to get lucky and win back what I've lost. And before you know it, you're thousands of pounds in debt. You're ashamed of it. It becomes a dark secret. And in the extreme cases, ultimately, some people take their lives because their whole wage has been flushed down the toilet using a gambling app. And you know, our governments have quite deliberately deregulated, reduced the amount of oversight on these gambling apps and all the rest of it. And to, you know, whenever you turn on a sports event, at every break, the main advertiser is a gambling company, because this is hugely profitable, and they have no conscience in terms of the societal impact of gambling. And who are the people driven to gamble? Very often it's the people who can least afford to lose money on a bet, because they are the most desperate. And where do these bookmakers tend to open up office? In the most deprived parts of town.
Yeah. I mean, it's a real scandal for sure. What do you make of the disclaimer, though, Bob, that they always include in their adverts about please bet responsibly?
Yeah, well, when you've got somebody addicted, that's going to go in one ear and out the other. The drive to recoup your loss, the attraction of the algorithms, how everything is personalized to you. You're made to feel part of a group, part of a club, you know? So they will use every emotional and mobile phone technology to keep you hooked. So the odd warning here and there has no meaningful impact. If it affected the bottom line, they would be out of the market, right? So you've got new gambling corporations popping up left, right, and center. So there's plenty of money still to be made by fleecing the most vulnerable.
No, absolutely. And just in terms of the mental health effect, I mean, you've obviously talked about people taking their own lives as a consequence of it, but I mean, they're more generally and obviously less extreme consequences than somebody committing suicide as a result of it. But I mean, is your sense that this proliferation of online gambling is adding to mental health difficulties for people, or is it not really making that much difference in that regard?
No, I think it's yet another thing. It's another straw on the camel's back, isn't it? If you're struggling to make ends meet, if you're in insecure work, you're struggling to pay the mortgage, and then you're getting more in debt because of gambling, well, there's enough there to push you over, right? And if it starts to impact how you function, then it may ultimately lead you to losing your job. Most gamblers who are getting into trouble are very ashamed, and that shame and inability to share your situation adds another psychological burden. So yes, it will contribute to the sliding down of your mental state.
Yes, indeed. It's another disgraceful aspect of a modern society and the economic agenda, which has been holding sway now for the best part of almost half a century now, really. But
and I'm sure a lot of the people who come to see me, first of all, it tends to be males who get more into the problem and feel more shame about discussing it. They're also more reluctant to come and talk about their mental health. And I suspect when I ask them about, well, why do you think you're in this situation? What's going on around you? They won't freely discuss the contribution of gambling.
No, indeed. Well, we're going to wrap it there then, Bob. Thanks again for very interesting contributions from you, and thank you to our audience for watching, and for those who put points to Bob.